No.
Thanks for reminding.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. I think this idea of the border of control I found in the article specifically. So, and that it relates to really interesting examples that I thought she explores this idea of the unknown. Trying to think where that was, which page that was. Yes, I think it's on page 181. So that's the section. It's called The Fantasy of Control, where when she talks about the German case, what seemed to, obviously this shifted constantly, right? What was considered the problem, or that migration is kind of considered a problem in the first place. That's kind of the big point I feel she's making, is like racism creates a problem for which a solution has to be found, or there are certain structures of thought that always already produce the problem for which then imagined solution is supposed to be needed, kind of thing. But yeah, there was this, I think it's in the section Fantasy of Control, where she talks a lot about this failure to register. So it's the number of people, but it's also not knowing who's coming, which I found really fascinating, because I've heard this, so this goes a little bit away from the theory, but personally I heard this a lot when you have debates in Germany and so on, and people who on the right tended, the arguments there shift. First is the numbers, then it was like, oh, we didn't know who was coming. So there's something about this, like the unknown, and sort of in my own work, all this idea of hospitality, she kind of talks about that. I think on the same page 181, she uses the term hospitality, and I was like thinking of Derrida there when he talks of either the invited or the uninvited guest. So the stranger who turns up at your door, or the person you have invited. I don't know if that's a good metaphor there, but I found it fascinating with this failure to register, that this became this kind of element there apparently, and how I think that ties into who's considered risky. Because if you think about with the situation in Ukraine now, there's no registration element for refugees in Germany right now. People are just, basically it's anyone gets automatically a 3-month status. They're trying to see sort of, have some sort of registration, but it's basically out the window. And, within Europe, that's also something she talks about, Schengen. It's funny that in 2015 it was constantly this narrative of like, oh, anyone could have come, but this is the reality within Europe already, right? Like any Italian, French, Spanish, Bulgarian person can just walk into Germany or drive or take the train, and no one will register this. So this is a reality, right? This is like, no state has control or really knowledge of who's coming and going. It's just that for certain groups that is considered risky. So yeah, I thought that was, this idea of control is something that kind of keeps returning now. The other themes you guys thought were interesting in the article?
I thought that the leadership role of Merkel in terms of saying we can do this, I thought that was it's clearly a lot of it was pinned on her leadership, and her just saying, this is a mark of a mature country that we can do this, which wouldn't happen in the UK. And it's as if it's like a test for Germany to actually do this as being like a big gesture of the capacity of, I suppose I kind of remember it as quite a surprising thing that happened, but it's a bit like an international relations sort of gesture that a powerful country makes, and I guess that kept on coming up through the article, I think.
Yeah, I thought, even though I found a little bit that this was almost a bit unexpected. So she does a lot of theory work, but interestingly, considering the name Merkel is even in the title, it's more, I think technically she talks more about Merkel's decision to open the border, which also, that's maybe another thing to explore was never really what happened on the ground, because the Schengen border was always open and closed at the same time. That was a fascinating thing to kind of read through as well. But with Merkel, yeah, I because I was trying to see where I did the note on that.
I mean that.
Yeah, sorry, you're going.
I'm not convinced the article really tells us what really did happen. Actually, I don't think it really tells us. It just, there's a lot of context about the decision in 2015, but not much, and maybe some numbers in there as well, but not really sort of what really did happen. And I think it lacked empirical evidence, actually. It just referenced other people's work a little bit. I thought it could have been more exciting, actually. I think that, I mean, Felix was talking a bit about the Derrida theory at the start, which I think it could have gone further with that, because it was talking about how, you know, when you make a decision like this, you're thinking always about the future and what, you know, did that future turn out? You know, there's been 5 years, I suppose. The article was 2020, is that right?
2021, yeah.
Okay, so let's say 5 years to kind of really see what happened, and that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah. That is, I think there's, for me, sort of to react to that, there were 2 points. I think on the Merkel element, that's something I actually asked myself. She seems to be a bit missing from the story and what it's about her. And I thought how that relates as well. So it's very focused on this idea of fantasies of control and why. So, and I think the point she's making is interesting, that it was not the opening of the border, but this disturbing of a fantasy she mentioned. I was like, this is, I think that resonated, because people, there was this, imagine of losing control, of a control that was never there and will never be there. So, but yeah, I wondered if, so she mentions how, and I know that from the German context, of how Merkel became for some this kind of savior woman, even some people on the left considering economically, she's like, you know, it was bizarre to see people on the left suddenly celebrating her. And then she became the most, you know, for the AfD, the pivotal hate figure. So, and for that, it actually explains very little. I mean, I know there's always limitations to an article and stuff, but I was like, I think there would have been interesting ways of kind of why is that so personalized around Merkel. She makes the point that these are far more structural problems, but why is that her, or why does it suddenly become her? And there's a lot of, you know, her as Mother Merkel, there would have been tons of stuff to explore there. But I actually also thought maybe other ways of why people were so angry of this decision. So there was the loss of control, but I wondered if there's other ways of to say, you know, like Merkel was the politician who for years, in Germany at least, it became this famous thing where and this was about the Greece crisis, the debt crisis, for neoliberal policies, where she kind of adopted that just there's no alternative, and sort of that's what she's known for as well. And, you know, when this happened, the Greece crisis was just over. So within Germany as well, I wondered if this was like, I don't know, if a part of the backlash to that was also she's just, you know, has decided something over our heads again. But yeah, I thought the Merkel, her as a figure was a bit missing from the article actually. But yeah, Felix.
Yeah, but I found that all the article was about the event of the announcement, and it's like everything was centrated about that, and then about the political objectives of an announcement like that. It's like that Merkel proposed another view than only that refugees are a burden for Germany. So I think it was more like in a political and symbolic way about what is the place of Merkel and Germany in Europe. She was doing like a really small comparison with the UK. And yeah, I found that it was like an article specifically about like the symbolic role and kind of an alternative of like migration policies in Europe. So I found it interesting how she she studied or analyzed this implication for like the political symbolic actions. But I was agreeing with Aled that like it's missing some empirical data or like more like a methodological analysis or like a presentation of how she processed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too, to be honest. There's another point I was thinking, but I can mention it in a little while. What are the other things? Jamie, what did you thought about it? Did you get any specific thoughts or anything you found interesting about
it? Yeah, my brain's not working today.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, I think one bit that I think the temporality element was like really interesting to me, but could have been like unpacked a bit more, particularly like with the references to Derrida. I think like a lot more could have been unpacked. And yeah, I highlighted a bit on page 184, just about refugees are responsible for putting at risk Germans' sense of being at home, not just now, but in the future. And I was just thinking, again, that's something that could be explored with like the imaginaries. So not because like not so focused on like the borders as like something hard, something closed to open, because as it says in the article, you know, the borders are porous anyway, but kind of, yeah, maybe a bit more about, yeah, that sense of being at home, I guess. Like, what does that mean, and how is that how is German's sense of being at home like entwined with, yeah, the inward migration and how it's seen as a risk, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I thought that too. That was yeah, that was an interesting thing for sort of German identity, but that's something I think that she mentions early briefly, that there is a comparison with sort of, I think at the article at the beginning, where she says there is an article that compares the responses of the UK and Germany, but then she kind of leaves it there. And I thought it was quite interesting to be like, okay, so what is it about specifically the German case that would have made this, you know, so interesting? So I thought that it would have been quite interesting to sort of, yeah, it mentions David Cameron very briefly as well, somewhere. But then just that Merkel made a contrasting decision and kind of leaves it there. And you think, oh, why? But I think that's on page 175 to 176. But yeah, it's kind of, it's not really exploring it any further in comparison. It's very focused on the kind of German case. Because I wonder if that's related more to the theory she wants to explore. It's more about, yeah, I think state imaginaries more broadly. She just uses it as an example to make a theoretical point, so to speak. But yeah, I'm thinking maybe it would be interesting to discuss this temporality element, because kind of from what I got, so I don't know if you guys had a look at the chance to look at the abstracts for the conference. That's kind of what she seems to be working on right now and talking about again. So I think her presentation is called Migration Politics, People in Time in a Spatialized World. And she writes there that she proposes to think of the problem of migration as a system of an imaginary that fails to reckon with time. And that's what she seems to explore throughout the article, even when she jumps between things. It's this idea of temporality. So Felix, you mentioned that basically the point she's criticizing is that this border opening is kind of constructed as the cause of problems. But to be honest, I wondered a bit to myself if she overemphasizes that a bit. Just from personal experience, yes, definitely some people on the right have made that argument, like along the lines like, oh, she opened the borders, too many people came, that's why we have all these racist attacks on refugee homes, because control was lost. But it's definitely not as, I don't know, it wasn't as big of a narrative as I think she seems to suggest, or at least how he said Alet as well. Like she doesn't give us a lot of data to back that up, really. Or what did you guys thought about? What did you guys thought about this element of, yeah, the temporal element around the border opening? Let's maybe talk about that a bit. This idea of the border as being opened at this particular moment in time. Did you find that interesting, or was there anything that you found like she didn't explore as well? Or
I think we kind of said this earlier, but I wasn't really sure what she meant by it actually like opening the border. Like that seemed to be, I think someone she says it's like obvious, or that was thought to be obvious, or something like that, something to that effect. And yeah, it's weird, isn't it, how different people are treated at the border. And even it says in the article as well, the checks weren't always done, or they were stopped at some points. So was it a priority issue, or was it like a staffing issue? I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
okay. Yeah, I think I could maybe answer to that. I thought that as well. That could have been made a bit clearer. I kind of knew it just through kind of following the situation back then. But what did other people thought about this idea of like where she explores this like open closed border element? Felix?
Yeah, for me, I find it interesting, like how she used, like how temporality is used for like political objectives, because at the end she told us that the number of like refugees coming to Germany didn't really increase, and at the end I found that the announcement of like opening borders, if it didn't have like a real impact on the numbers of migrants entering in Germany, like all the objectives, like the political objectives of this announcement were like creating, how she said, like creating a proudness on in the German society of like we are a welcoming country. And like in comparison with the reaction of David Cameron, like David Cameron only played on the empathy of like about the image of Alan Kurdi. It was like an affective reaction for like, but he didn't implement some migration politics. And Merkel, she tried to propose like a reaction, like a political reaction, which was like concrete, but like it was more like not about like welcoming more migrants, but more like intending to shift or to shift the national ideas about migration, and how like also about temporality, how like Germans people should have thought migration about a longer term than only like it's a burden for the society, or like it's dangerous for the society, and more about like the economic and symbolical advantage of like opening borders. And I find like, I don't know if it's really well explained in the article, but I find it quite interesting, like how the symbolic of borders could be used by Merkel for like playing on this idea. I don't know if I am really clear, but like about temporality, I find it like political strategic quite interesting.
Maybe also the like it doesn't say much about Greece, but you know, the places where there were lots of asylum seekers didn't have time. They didn't have time to make decisions. They didn't have time to think about. They were just reacting, whereas Germany had time to plan. You know, because if you accept asylum seekers and you give people, you know, refuge, then you need to commit lots of resources and you need to pay lots of attention. And I read again that this is on page 178 at the bottom, that in 2011 the asylum system in Greece had been found to amount to inhumane and degrading treatment by the European Court of Human Rights, and then it says Germany had stopped returning asylum seekers to South and Southeast Europe in early 2015. So it's actually Germany had a lot of time to think about what it wanted to do, and it probably didn't have the. I mean, I remember that period of like so much pressure on, you know, I got to know names of places in islands off Sicily and you know, that I never would have known otherwise because they were in the media all the time. So yeah, I think maybe the temporal dimension is obviously it's about geography because people arrive at the fringes of the European Union, and then Germany is like the center of this sort of this space. But then time is also, if you have lots of people, you know, if you've got lots of work to do, then you haven't got time. Anyway, that's just a thought.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the time element is probably what she's concerned most with, and I have the feeling she's going to talk about the conference, and what comes through at the end is, and I thought that was probably conceptually the most interesting element. I thought that sort of came at the end of the article about this like idea of the unknown. I'm just calling it the unknown guest, but this idea of like where she talks about from page 181 onwards, this idea of what then seemed to bother them was the failure to register people, and then even so this kind of idea of registration, the unknowns of sort of the knowable, but then how she relates it to the future, the future of political community. And I have to say, I hadn't even heard of that, but that was a bizarre reading. I think it's on page 183 of like, I mean, it doesn't come as a German surprising that it comes from that party, but a politician of the CSU, which is the more right-wing element of the Conservative Party, where it was like, what is it, hundreds of thousands in the country of whom we do not know who they really are and how they will be at some point. That was a bizarre thing to read, because I think there's two elements to that. At least personally, there is the already, you know, racialized element of always categorizing someone as risky, you know, but it's usually termed in this like, oh, you know, it was first termed in like this idea of failing to register people. But then once people were in, it shifted to, oh, they could become criminals in the future. So, but yeah, I think it's this idea of being able to control this idea of political community as well. So there was this like, oh, we can't control anymore what Germany in the future will be. But what's the problem? I think again the point she's making is that it's this is never knowable. By definition, the future cannot be known. So this fantasy is kind of always bound to fail. This is kind of this was the element of time I thought was interesting there at the end. I thought of the border opening. That was the last thing as well that she what was it? I'll come back to me. I can't think of it just now. Is there anything else people thought was interesting? Mila, what did you thought of it? Oh, Felix, maybe first, and then Mila.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I'm glad you talk about that, because I was not sure to really understand what was like the fantasy of control. Yeah, I didn't got it. So yeah. Yeah, sorry, this is all like for now.
Okay. Well, my sense I got was that usually, so it's always about control, right? This territorial idea states this idea it's considered a hallmark to know who enters a country and to be able to control it. So that's the first fantasy. You can never fully control that. I think the point she's making, it's not just about the spatial element of who comes in and out, which is deeply geographical, but it's also not being able to control the future, so to speak. And I think the point she's making is that this is something a little bit ignored and should probably be looked at. And I think that's why she's using this particular moment as well of the border opening, which was, you know, that I found fascinating as well. It was never open. So, but there, I genuinely thought it gets a bit worried, but I'll explain that, Felix, because you wanted to say something.
Yeah, about this idea of like fantasy of control, and also about this idea of like an unknown future of like threatening the political community of Germany. I found it interesting about like to still speak about temporalities, but because like for me it sounds really similar to like the arguments of like far right political movements in Europe in general, that you have like a mainland, you have to protect it from like the outside, and also that you have like a natural historical community inside of the country, and then the arrival of other cultures or others in general like could be like a threat for like the political community. But like the idea for me of political community is already porous and historically constructed, no? And also I wanted to say something else about like different scales, because for me, like in the European context, I found it quite interesting. Like in the article, she talked about like that the migration migration policies in Europe are like more in peripheries on countries who had like the external Schengen borders. And then she speak about the reaction at the scale of only one country, Germany. So like also, I don't know if it's really wanted, but it's like the contrast between national reactions and about control that is like totally international or like regional. So like about different scales, I find it also quite interesting. Like could think more about it.
Yeah. Does someone want to intervene there? I thought that was Cosi.
Yes, I really like the idea of temporality, because I think that is central in this article. Because the first temporality that give insight to this article is that at the time Angela Merkel decided to open the door, all European countries were, I don't know, were not ready to accept migrant people in their country, and that led her to be like I don't know, the leader of European humanitarian policy. And the second thing that can be interesting in these ideas of temporality, I think it is about what will come after migration. Migrant will, after I don't know, she opened doors. How these people will will stay, how will they become, or how will they work there, how will they, I don't know how to say it, how will they, how to give, I don't know, commodities and everything these people need in Germany, and what German people will become in 5 years, 10 years, if these people stay there a long time. And I think that is what she wants to put emphasis on it, because this I don't know, this topic, it's very important, because that is what people don't want to, they don't to welcome migrants, because they fear that their identity, their national identity can be disturbed by these people who are coming and bring other things that are not really their own culture, the national culture. And that's it can be related to the ideas of unknown. If we welcome people today in our country, what can the first time is, are we able to just to help these people, to give them commodities, everything, and after will we be able to support them for a long time? And these ideas of unknown, I don't know, is another form of border that leads countries and other countries not to open their doors, and that can be I don't know, a sort of an open a sort of border open, like that Angela Merkel brings into Germany, because when she said we can do this, people start to believe that they can welcome people, they can be with them, and they can support them for a long time, you know. Then the idea of control, it means that we can physically, it is not possible that even to control borders, to control physically borders in Europe, even in Africa, in other, even in USA, we can. It is not possible. But the ideas of control, it is just to give to these people fearing that we can do it. But the control is something, it is just symbolic. It is not really something that can be really done effectively. It is just symbolic to say that even we are trying to control the flow that migrants we are coming, but you know that we also are willing to control them, to limit the number of people who will come. I'm really sorry, my English is not very good, but I think you get what I want to say.
No, I think it was really good. Thank you very much. Because I think this was a really great point. I don't know if the others want to jump in there, but what I got from what you said, because it was that so the control is also about this, where she said we can do this. So it's not just the kind of simply the controlling border, but it's also, and I thought this was actually interestingly, it's also a bit absent. So it's all about the border opening. It's this very temporal moment she studies. But in the title, it's actually the title of the article is "We Can Do This," right? And this saying I found fascinating and very little explored, because it's like, so, and it relates to what you guys both mentioned now, I think Felix and Cozy, about national identity. And I think Jamie, you wrote in the chat just now that, is it a danger for that as well? What's imagined to be German? So this, yeah, I was like, so we can do this. I always found this fascinating. So first, who's we, right? What are we doing? We can do this. What is the doing we're doing here? And what is this? It's all very open, isn't it? Like, it seems to be assumed that everyone knows what is talked about here. But I wondered, relating that to what Cozy just said, if this is it's again about regaining control, So, but in this case, it's not about controlling the border. Also, the people are in Germany within its territory now. And now it's like, we can do this. We can control it's, and then it became all about integration, about getting people jobs, about or, you know, controlling, you know, future criminals in its most extreme case on page 1, what was it? Yeah, and the sort of 183, where it's about like, but it's a similar thing. This whole we can do this. It's like suggesting to the German populace that the future can be controlled again. Yeah, Felix.
Yeah, I really agree with what you say. Così, le micro. And for me, it's like more like saying that we can do this as like, it's really strong for like politically in Germany and geopolitically in Europe. And she said something about like how Merkel just argues and defend politics. And the first point is like saying that there is like values for a country, and that posing like a really long-term objective and values of what should be the German politics about migration. And I think like the thing I really liked about this event and this analysis is how the like Merkel is trying to show another path for like controlling migrations. And for me, like in the context of like increasing climate change, and that the provision of like migration, international migration will increase a lot, I find it really optimistic about like the issues of like managing migrations in a country like Germany, and like more broadly in Europe. And it's like for me this sentence, like we can do this, is really like a really long-term invective. I don't know how to say that. Long-term shout, or like it's like politically and geopolitically, I find it really, really strong.
Yeah.
Surely that can apply to any policy, can't it? Any policy that's gonna commit lots of energy. You know, it could be about building houses, it could be about reframing the economy, etc., etc. I mean, politicians are always saying we can do this. We can, you know, Boris Johnson has said we can get Brexit done. It's plus ça change. I think it's the same. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that's, I suppose it's probably that something no country has ever really made such a big commitment to specifically to giving refuge to people. And maybe the actual phrase could have been a bit, I don't know, maybe I'm not German, I don't study German politics, but I don't know, maybe France, maybe there is something, maybe there is, that generally doesn't happen in German politics, I don't know.
I think it's very interesting, this what you just said, using other examples of how this is. And I was just thinking of that. So for example, the idea of getting Brexit done, we can do this. It's a bit of a funny translation as well. There's two things. We can do this is not quite fully accurate. I think what she said in German was wir schaffen das, which kind of means that, yes, when you would type it into a translator, this would come out, but schaffen suggests that you undertake something that has a finishing point. It's like a task. So you can do the task, but the task will be over. And then you either done it successfully or not, right? And this is something I think is a little bit lost in this English translation. And I think this gets to, this kind of relates to what you just said a little about, this idea of getting Brexit done. We can do this. It's again, it's this idea of control. Okay, there's a big task, but there will be an endpoint, and then it will be successful. And I think maybe for building houses on this is accurate, but migration or like identity, community, it's Felix, this relates back with what you started with, is always open-ended. It's never, you know, it goes back again, maybe that's just a feeling for me, to this fantasy of like, oh, now we have all these unknown people. Now we just need to make them known or integrate them. And then we're back to this normal Germanness, which is coherent and homogeneous. You know what I mean? It's all about control again. But yeah, I found this, so the German, I don't know, this just came to me that the German translation is just slightly different. Also the Schaffen. So Schaffen means, it has this implication of like a hard task ahead. Like you would say that when something that involves struggle lies ahead, you know? So we can do this is almost a bit more optimistic and like upbeat. The German version was too, like that was her point, I think she wanted to make, but it's just a slightly different connotation when you actually look at the word that she's using.
Thanks, that's useful to know.
Yeah, it's just what I thought, but it definitely relates, I find, to this idea of control again. Yeah. Yeah, maybe a last thing, that's what I found interesting, and I think that's maybe a little bit missing, but again, it's because I think the article really is about temporality and the whole border opening, where maybe one criticism I thought was, I don't know, so she makes this big point about how, yes, racism kind of creates the problem in the first place. So, and she uses this example to show, oh, there were racist attacks and before the border opening. Yeah, that basically, I don't know, I think she's sort of overplaying that point a little bit for her theoretical purpose. So she wants to make the point that this is part of the problematic imaginative as this kind of, you know, step-by-step events, and kind of retrospectively declaring this event as what caused, you know, like, you know, disrupting Germany, causing racism while this existed before. But I found interesting there that, yeah, I mean, she says, and that's kind of sort of known. So I think she's a little bit overplaying that. I think it's on page 176 that actually, so what she's talking about is where the border was open, which was open all along, but where Germany just decided to not close its borders within the Schengen area was at the beginning of September. But actually, from all the people who came that year, almost more than half were already, or like a little bit less than half, but like a significant amount was before that happened, had arrived in Germany already. So it wasn't like, oh, Merkel announced there will be no, you know, no asylum seeker will be returned to Schengen state like Greece or so on, and then suddenly all those people started coming. That wasn't really what was happening. But I don't know if that's if that point is really that essential sort of thing, at least in the German public. I don't know. She kind of she calls it somewhere that it's this relentless repetition of that, and I didn't really have that feeling that this was the case. But it is definitely, I think, a good theoretical point to make in the terms of, you know, how racism, how sort of refugees are blamed for creating problems that are actually put on them from the outset. But actually, maybe a last thing, I don't know what you guys thought, this idea of identity, how that is explored, because a couple of you mentioned that sort of German identity, national identity. I found it a little bit missing, or what did you thought? Felix, did you want to say something? Or?
Yeah, just the thing, but for me, like, identity is like rooted on spaces, and like the main figure of identity is like the national one. Like we feel more French or German than European, like in general. And then like the article just like highlight the fact that always migrants are like the figure of like alterity, and then it just like reactive identities mechanism, and then it's like you reinforced your identity in front of the other. of like the alterity. So I found it like I was thinking that if Merkel was saying totally the contrary, like saying that we're gonna close the border, we can do this, like rejecting all the refugees during the migrant crisis. I think that like in the reality, like the arrivals of migrants will not really change, but like it's all about the reaction of like the announcement and the event. So finally, it was just like an identity policy from Merkel more than like a migrating policy, no? Because it was more about like creating a new like impulse, like a welcoming culture, or not culture, but like mood or like a moment. But like for me, it was more like an identity policy than a migrating one. And so it's also about like all the symbolic stuff of like place of Germany in the Europe and about identity. For me, it's more about that. It's like reinforcing or like trying to impulse new ways of like constructing the identity, because like the for me the processes of like constructing a national identity is nowadays is more about like the nationalist identity of like rejecting migrants than like the welcoming identity. Like both exist, but like the more visible is like the nationalist one. So yeah, for me, everything is about like the like a political managing of national identity, or like I don't know how to express that, but like and every time like it's also about the crisis for me, because like crises always invoke like special reactions, and also about like the pandemic, like all the political reaction during a crisis is also like sometimes more impactful during crisis. And it's all about like there is like literature about like managing crisis. And it could be interesting that the Zephus, the author, used like this kind of literature too, because always also she wrote the article like 5 years after the crisis. So I think she could find some literature about this crisis in Germany.
I agree. I think on page 185, it talks about Merkel saying her performance showed the possibility of another way, gesturing towards an alternative imaginary in which the world is interconnected, not just in terms of business serving Germany's economy, but in terms of ethico-politics. He reframed inward migration as a sign of strength and an occasion for pride, while suggesting that values and human rights lose their meaning when applied only to Europeans. So yeah, I agree with Felix. I think it was kind of something that came from a crisis, but showed somebody had to do something about this crisis, and it wasn't a problem that was going to be solved easily, and Germany had the means and the resource to do it. And maybe the article could have gone, and we talked earlier on about how they had sort of imposed economic conditions on Greece in time before that. So maybe it's like a redistribution in a way of political influence and doing the right thing in 2015, whereas maybe before they didn't do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe as a kind of, from my side, last thing to that national identity, what you guys both said, what I found really interesting, and is a little bit buried in the article, or it doesn't come through to the sort of forefront of theoretical discussion, is on page 180. I don't know if you guys called on it. There's a section where she discusses the German constitution. And it's quite fascinating. So we in Germany, there is a Grundgesetz, the constitution, and in it, there's a very definite individual right to asylum, right? So like anyone, I mean, this is written into law, anyone would win that in front of it, in a court of law, that you have the right to claim asylum. If you get it or not, it's a different story, but everyone has the right. And since the 90s, Germany had to go through a lot of legal acrobatics to, because obviously you had the political, political pressure since the 90s, like, oh, we have too many people coming, but because we have this in the constitution, we're like, how could we solve that problem? Well, let's, the solution was those people, they shouldn't get to Germany in the first place. But a second thing they kind of did there was the whole Dublin system. So where is it? It's on page 180 where she describes it. So an individual right to asylum, and that rejecting asylum seekers at the border is possible only if they have submitted a claim to asylum elsewhere in the UK, which, for example, would have been Greece. But there we discussed earlier, you had court cases where it said you cannot send them back there. So by the time someone actually arrives in Germany, legally speaking, they have a right to claim asylum. And you had all these fascinating contradictions, I think, in the footnote 5, where it says, the problem is if you enter Germany without papers, that's also illegal. So they literally had to charge every single asylum seeker with a crime, but also couldn't turn them away, right? Those were two laws which are literally contradicting. Just great stuff. I mean, not great, but it shows, and I wonder if that relates to this identity thing. So she discusses that a little bit there in this section, till the section that's called the fantasy of control, but not in detail, where it's like, you had this big discussion between Merkel and Seehofer and other, actually the page starts, Merkel and Seehofer, and indeed experts in constitutional law disagreed over whether asylum seekers could be turned away. So there is definitely, I would agree with you guys, this national identity politics of what it means to be German in comparison. There was definitely as well, oh, look how more welcoming we are than the Brits and whatnot. But I wonder about this constitutional thing. I think she was genuinely worried that this would be a precedent of breaking the German constitution. I think that there's this kind of formal element as well that maybe influenced the decision, but it's kind of, but I think it's not about the legalities, it's about a very distinct German history and what the constitution means because of its, how historically in Germany it has been turned on its head. And so this, this was like an almost like, no, we rather deal with the outcome of whatever may come, but we're not going over this limit of literally breaking our own constitution. So yeah, that's kind of something I thought would be interesting to explore as well in the future. But yeah, I'm realizing it is 5:03. So do other people have any kind of last thoughts or anything they found interesting or we haven't discussed yet as a kind of last thought on the article you really want to get off your chests? Cozy?
Yes, just I want just to say that this article is very important theoretically because the theoretical aspect that brings in what we call world studies that address the question about border control and identity issues. She brings something new because at the several times we read in this topic our so-called world studies that many countries, especially developing countries, are often close their borders. They never open it. But we have a case studies that talks about countries like Germany that open the border for welcome migrants. That's a very interesting aspect, but also she highlights something that is so interesting and that is not often seen in world studies. That is the questions about how the question about unknown. What come after these policies? What can it at the long term aspect? What will come after? And in the world study, people don't often talk about it. They just say about control, how people are suffering at the border, how people are trying to just to cross the border, even their patrol control who are there, and how identities are mobilized, are used to face these people to cross the border. That's the aspect I want, the point I want to highlight.
Yeah. No, thank you. Anyone else? Anything kind of last thoughts? Maybe from my side as a last thing, we don't have the time really to discuss this further, but it could be, thinking until our conference, something to ask or sort of think about. I found this, unknown element very interesting as well, and why back then in 2015, and I think it really has to do with what kind of, we had lately in our media, even this debate of, people, and not just from academia, but journalists, a lot of people picking up on the fact that how Ukrainian refugees were portrayed and talked about compared to people from Afghanistan, Syria, Ethiopia, who came in 2015 predominantly. And this idea of, that it's portrayed as, that it's a danger not knowing who is coming. But I wonder if that's actually the case, because right now, there's hundreds of thousands of people on the move, millions of people on the move, in fact, and it's not considered dangerous or a problem, right? So it's not just the unknown, it's also like, it's more who is considered unknown that actually kind of gets to the bottom of the heart. Why do we consider some people? I'm not sure myself, it's about who, do we consider someone unknown, or do we consider different people unknown, but some of them dangerous and some of them not, right? I think that's maybe what it kind of relates to, but yeah, Felix.
Just, do you think that people who think that migrants from some country like Afghanistan or Africa, like people who think that migrants from those countries like are dangerous, do they think too that Ukrainian could be dangerous? I don't know if, like, it's, I don't know, but it could be like more about the like government's positionality about migration, more than about like the processes in the society. Like, for example, in, like, for me, I was thinking it's just like geographical proximity. Like Ukraine is like in Europe, like it's closer than other countries. But in Colombia, the Venezuela migrant crisis is also creating a strong, strong reactions, like kind of racist, or not racist, but how do you say that? Like xenophobic.
Yeah. Xenophobic.
But it's also about like the amount of people who came in the country. Like Colombia received 2 million people like in only 1 year, so it's like more massive migrant waves than, like, there are like many parameters to take into account. But it was my question. It's like, do the part of the population that they say like migrants are dangerous, do they think the same about like Ukrainian people? And
not, Jamie just put in the chat there that, yeah, definitely there is a racialization element. Don't know if you want to say something to that, Jamie, but I would agree there as well, and Alet agreed as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said, Franz, about the unknown with people as well as the temporality element, because I hadn't really thought about that in the article. But yeah, like I just think even in the article it's saying about, you know, when with the tweet about Syrians bypassing the Dublin regulation, and you just see like instances of this happening all the time, particularly in Europe, of just, you know, as you say, like Ukrainians, welcome into my home, you know, no problem, massive outcry. And then, you know, a few months ago, something's happening in like Palestine or anywhere else. And I think, yeah, I think there's like an inherent kind of racialization when we think about it, but that's probably underpinned by, you know, hundreds of years of, yeah, lots of things. But yeah, I think that's something that could be unpacked a bit more in the future as well.
Yeah, thank you for contributing. I would agree definitely that there is a difference there. I still personally, I don't know if this goes too far away, but I was still a bit surprised because you had also over the last couple of years from definitely not I don't think it was a racist, but a more xenophobic narrative of Eastern Europeans coming and stealing jobs. Definitely not as bad as it was in the UK, where it kind of, you know, was one of the pillars of Brexit. But you had that in Germany too. Like, you know, people would AfD would also bitch about more Bulgarians and Romanians coming, but definitely Eastern Europeans were not a welcomed group kind of thing. So I have to say, I was caught a little bit aghast of how suddenly, and you know, like basically, you know, arguments that have been pondered for the last 10 years that it's dangerous, you know, not knowing who's coming, that we need to register, we need to control, or basically in this case, just, you know, not taken into consideration, or it's then suddenly portrayed that it's not a problem. So I was still a bit surprised about it, but that goes a bit too far away from the article, maybe. Yeah, but thanks. Definitely, I think this racialization element of unknown, that's probably something to maybe kind of look into a bit further. All right. Yeah, maybe it's the last thing. What did you thought overall? I thought it was all right. There were some interesting elements, but it's yeah, I thought it jumped a bit between theory and empirics too much. Could have been woven into a sort of a more coherent story, maybe.
I thought it was a lot of it just felt like journalism, actually. A lot of it felt like something which I'd read in a, you know, like a good newspaper. I think the theory stuff at the start was really interesting, but it didn't get developed very much. But I think it really would be interesting to, you know, because if you're the temporal thing, I think is really important, and so it'd be good to develop that a little bit more and find out what she might do next. You know, how she might take this in 5 years or 10 years, whether it's a theme that could be a significant project. Because I guess that, maybe a European country has never had received that many refugees in. If you look at Afghanistan, or like between countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan, millions of people have become refugees really quickly, and millions of people just now from Ukraine and stuff. But one country to receive just in that 1 year is interesting, and maybe she could study it further. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we'll have a chance to ask her about that. I think maybe to give you a bit of context as a last thing, if you're interested in asking her, because she's gonna, I think, talk about this. She's definitely gonna talk about temporality in terms of migration again and community. So it's definitely maybe a good thing to take from this article. This is also because I kind of know her work from my international relations background. She's actually a proper theorist, like all the stuff. So this is the first time I've ever seen her write something with a bit of empirics in it. All the stuff she's written before is just pure political theory, right? Or at least the kind of in international relations she's done, not pure theory. She's written a lot about war actually before that. So this is the first piece where she's been working on migration. So I think it's for her maybe a bit of a, she sort of only lately started writing of migration, which I thought why she would be an interesting person for the conference as well, because it kind of takes us to this, like how people outside migration studies approach the topic. So yeah, could be interesting to keep in mind when she's doing her presentation in May. All right. Yeah, no one has any last things they want to say. Great. No, thanks everyone for coming. I know it's I as well. I read the piece and was on Easter holidays till yesterday, so I had to kind of 5 minutes before think my way back into it. So I know it was a bit of a weird timing today for it, but I'm glad we still managed to get a bit of a discussion on it before the conference. So I think, it's good that sort of we have hopefully some people in the audience who already know that and can react to what she's going to present there. So yeah, no, thanks for coming, everyone, and really excited to see, I think, all of you at the conference. Sweet.
How does well done, Franz, as well. Thanks for organizing. How did these discussions feature in the conference? Like, well, is there a chance to reflect a bit, or even just try and remember what we talked about, because I can't remember everything?
Absolutely, I'll try. I think one of the things I want to do in May is kind of make a list and listen through our recordings again and kind of come up with a couple of themes. Both Mila and me, I don't think we have done it yet, but one of the ideas was we have obviously the homepage for the conference. If you guys are interested, we could, that was something we had discussed as a potentiality. We could put the recordings up in a little section so people can listen to our discussions again and see what they found interesting. I definitely, so when Mila and me came up with the panel themes, we kind of tried to align it a bit with the themes that kind of came out of the reading group sort of thing. And kind of, it was a bit of a mix. We tried to get obviously the themes of what people were presenting, and the themes that came from the reading group, and then kind of find common ground, so to speak. But definitely, I think it would be good for her presentation, but also our presentations, kind of to see, from the discussions that came from this reading group, to have a bit of a reflection, maybe. So yeah, definitely. I think one way is that we could put the recordings up on the webpage and people can have a listen again. I will definitely will do that. Did that answer your question? Or yes. Mila is sending the website again just now. This is more the program.
That was good. I think it'd be good just to have the recordings there and just to kind of see what journey we've been on, because it has been interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a good investment of time as well,
Yeah. I mean, it's I can discuss it with Mila. I don't know if you guys are interested. I know the May is quite busy, for at least because we're planning the conference. There's a lot of other stuff, but would you guys be interested in like a last Zoom call before the conference to discuss what we've been kind of talking about in the reading group as a kind of last summary session, so to speak?
Or maybe afterwards.
Or afterwards, that would be an idea, actually. Yeah, that's actually that is a good idea.
Yeah, to see if we've changed our minds about things.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah, that is a very good idea. Okay, well, if people are really interested in that was anyway something Mila and me were discussing, then we can kind of, I'm unfortunately in Belfast for a whole week next week on a field trip, but then beginning of May we can see that we put the recordings on the because it's obviously those things are related, the reading group and our conference kind of thing, so that we put them up, and yeah, then people have the chance to listen to it again and think about it. Cool. Yeah, no, thanks for that, bringing that up, Alet. I think that's a very good point. All right. Well, we'll get to that, and obviously we'll keep you updated via email and things like this. And yeah, I think this was a really good point to finish there, Alet, to sort of think about what have we been talking about. Kind of, I think we'll put the recordings up, but also maybe the readings, because we read obviously these different articles, kind of themes came from it. So and to see how it kind of features with what we're all going to present there. So. All right. Well, yeah, again, thank you everyone for coming today for this last kind of session before the conference. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you all there.
Yeah, and feel free to ask us some question if you have question about the conference and stuff. So yeah, drop us an email.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for organizing everything.
Thanks for participating.
Guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you soon, then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.